Alessandra, thank you so much for coming on and having a chat with us. Um, the reason why I asked you to come on is, of course, because I feel like you have a wealth of knowledge in almost across a number of industries and interests. And of course, this sort of talk is more in regards to impact, which you also know a lot about. And why don't we just start with what you do and sort of your background?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So, what I do right now in my background, I've always been an entrepreneur and an investor, usually just one or the other, and now both. So, I grew up very entrepreneurially, like doing like little things here and there. And then when I was at university, I got more into technology, finance, and actually governance as well, which is the main reason why I've been in the blockchain space for almost 8 years now. And so I then went to private equity, venture capital, and then I started having my companies. Now, Top Tier Impact is one of them. Top Tier Impact is a global network of impact investors, impact entrepreneurs, and corporate leaders. We're all about impact and sustainability. We're across more than 24 countries now, and our members, like they really like some of them are founding partners at venture capital firms, others run super impactful companies, others oversee sustainability at large energy firms. So we have this kind of like collective brain in the impact space. And we have various activities out of that. Obviously, there is a lot of investing happening. There is a lot of partnerships, insights, and knowledge exchange. That's why I like to call it my collective brain in the impact space. I do learn every day through it. So yeah, I've been seeing the impact space evolving over time, and now we're kind of this central node in it, and there is a lot happening. So yeah.
That's fantastic. And I know that you have also been involved in healthcare in the past. Could you tell us a little bit about that initiative as well?
Sure. That's been across a few different areas of what you can call healthcare. So you've got on one side consumer health, and then you can go all the way to therapeutics and biotech. So as an investor, I've actually been mostly involved on that side of things. I started doing biotech investing. Now it's 6 years ago, early stage. And back then, no normal venture capital firm wanted to do it. It was more like specialist VC firms just in biotech doing it. But I saw how the field was starting to change because it was no longer just biotech. You had AI, machine learning, and computer science, like various other fields like coming into it, and making it actually something that now, in the past few years, every normal VC firm wants to be in that space. Like every kind of like angel investor thinks about it. And so I've seen the space evolving over time like that. And actually my very first angel investment in that space is now one of the UK success stories in biotech. But I mean, it's funny, right, to look at it now, because back then it was just like this very like confusing field. And I remember telling it to a lot of colleagues on the investment space, like, no, we really don't want to go into that sector. And now they're all like, oh wow, like how did you catch that? So yeah, it's been really exciting to follow the space. I think there is so much more to come. There are also areas like medical devices. I think now with COVID, all of this is very topical, but what's been happening in medical devices in the past years is that, again, AI, machine learning, other areas have been coming into it, making it more consumer friendly, making it more powerful, making it more accessible. So there is a lot happening there as well.
Absolutely, and we're definitely going to touch on that topic a lot in a bit. There's a lot to say about that, and it's incredibly interesting what's going on in that space. And it's also amazing the fact that you managed to, out of your own interest or maybe just other interests, just catch that early on, and again how it's magnified exponentially these days as well because of the pandemic. But I did want to touch on a quick topic, because ironically I have been receiving your e-newsletters for Top Tier Impact. I don't even know how, but I've been reading them, of course, and I noticed that you have quite an affinity towards writing. So has that always been something that you've been interested in, or is that something that you just developed over time? Does it just come to you when you write about something you're passionate about? Because I have to say those newsletters are the real deal. you know.
Oh, thank you. That's sweet. You know, you're so spot on actually, because in asking me this, and yeah, it's really nice of you to notice that I've always just enjoyed writing a lot. Like it's actually been, I think when I was a little child, I started writing stories and then short stories. And at some point, because I've always had the entrepreneurship side as well, I was like, okay, I'm going to sell these stories. But I loved it. I really loved writing. And it turns out it translates to all languages if you like it in general, because, you know, I grew up actually speaking Italian and French. And so I was writing them mostly in Italian, which is a completely different language. And I almost surprised myself when I switched to German and English for my studies that it translated. You know, it's more like a thing, like you like to play with that. So yeah, it's always been there. And it's, you know, when they say those things that you just enjoy and you don't even realize and all of that. So yeah, I just really enjoy it.
Absolutely, and I think that as an entrepreneur and as a sort of thought leader, like I myself love to write. I've always liked creative writing. I've been very involved with it since I was in school, even before. And now, when it comes to writing, let's say blogs about, let's say the digital space or anything in correlation to what I'm doing or just in general, I feel like it definitely does help develop the business aspect or develop your thoughts a bit more. It does help in that way, and definitely as an impact leader, expression is key, as we know these days. What do you sort of think of the whole idea of expressing in the modern world as an impact leader, either through social media or through newsletters, or what has been your experience with that so far?
So actually in the impact space, this is more needed than ever, because there is a lot of confusion. There is a lot of like demand for education. I remember that in late 2018, I had given like a speech related to the UN, and it made me think about the lack of cooperation and synergies in the impact space. And it was really on my mind. And I put this post out on LinkedIn. I've developed my audience mostly on Instagram over the years, but I was like, oh, I'm going to put this post on LinkedIn because it's so boring. Like it will belong there. And the post went so viral that I was contacted by hundreds of family offices, fund managers, like corporate leaders, everybody kind of, and I was not equipped to answer to all of that at the time. Everybody, the common thing I noticed was the need for thought leadership, actually, because it's such a confusing space, and everybody, depending on the geography, depending on the sector, has a different language for it. And this was actually something where, because I really cared about that problem, you know, like how it is as an entrepreneur, if you really care about the problem, you need to find solutions, right? Mm-hmm. And so it got me to think, okay, how can I help with all of this? And that's actually why at Top Tier Impact, we created this weekly newsletter that goes out to a broader audience. So not just our members, we are a membership network, but it's a weekly newsletter that goes out to like thousands and thousands of impact and sustainability professionals, or just professionals like in the investment space, in the technology space, who are interested in learning more.
Exactly, and I think that it's actually it's such a stark contrast from the kind of instant sharing, instant content sharing world that we sort of have, you know, evolved into, in the sense that when it comes to thought leadership, when it comes to VCs, when it comes to impact initiatives, when it comes to you know, structural organizations, a proper sort of well-written piece goes a long way. It goes a very long way. And this kind of brings me to my next point, which is, of course, you know, the situation that we're all sort of going through right now, COVID-19. And I understand that you have been spending your time in Thailand. What is sort of the situation like in Thailand right now? Because I know that, of course, you're living in London, and you decide to, you know, it must be a stark contrast from the situation there as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I decided, when I realized, okay, we're all going to be kind of locked down in one way or the other, might as well be locked down like with this great weather and kind of in paradise. But the situation here is pretty good, because Thailand, everybody's speculating, is it a combination of the weather or the reaction, or Thailand actually was the first country, or one of the first countries, to get the virus coming from China. So actually I remember that I was here in January and February. So I was meant to go back to London after that period. And I remember starting to have friends texting me, "Oh, I'm reading in the news. Is everything okay?" I was like, pretty fine. And then at some point it tilted, right? So Europe and the US started being like the epicenter, definitely for the news. And Thailand kept on handling this really well. At some point, they started implementing measures like similarly to how the West went about it, because otherwise they didn't really need them. So there are restrictions here. There is a curfew. There are no big events, like all of the typical measures that we see pretty much everywhere in the world, actually everywhere in the world. So there is that, but it's very much under control. So yeah, it feels like a mild version of lockdown.
That's really, really good to hear. And obviously it's very interesting to hear what various countries have been doing, but what various cities have, how they've been reacting. It's literally the starkest contrast I've ever heard of, especially when it comes to places like Sweden, which are sort of, experimenting with the herd immunity aspect and kind of letting people run wild and free to a limit, as opposed to, for example, India, which is on a complete lockdown till a point in May. It's been 21 days, and I've heard that they're losing an estimated $4.6 billion every day of lockdown. So it's just fascinating to hear what each and every leader has thought the best move. And of course, I think it's a very difficult time for them as well, because it's sort of a trial and error. There's no real answer for this pandemic. There's no real answer for this virus, and definitely, it's been interesting observing how the digital IT space, ICT, has sort of helped certain societies and governments, tackle the virus. What are your sort of observations of the same?
So I think that overall, you've got the full spectrum of reactions, right? And there were places like in Asia, this was not the first time. This was not the first rehearsal. So SARS and having taken measures, like real measures to be prepared, helped so much. It helped a lot of the Asian countries. Also, I think taking it seriously early on and being firm early on, because in the West, it was very much like, what is this? Oh, this is not serious. It is just like the flu. And then at some point it was panic. And at some point it was like, we're shutting down everything, right? Whereas here, across Asia, it was much more gradual. It was, okay, we take it seriously right away and we implement what needs to be implemented. We're not going to kick the can down the road and then completely panic and do everything at once without even knowing what works and what doesn't. So I think it was a combination of like having experience, but then also like handling it professionally from the beginning in the countries that did well. And so, I found it a bit of watching a movie unfold where you kind of already know the script, because when I decided to stay here and kind of like spend this time here, I had spent days before that, like really looking into all the data, speaking with people who had already been monitoring for months, people who everybody was like, oh, you're exaggerating and all of that. And so I suddenly realized, and I was like, I can't believe that Europe and the US are not doing anything yet, but doing it in a milder way, so it doesn't have to come to anything extreme. So it was like watching it unfold like that.
And of course, you had a TED Talk that was scheduled in London, which you were concerned about, but like you mentioned, people were not really that concerned at that point.
Yes.
End up getting postponed?
So I remember, so the TED Talk was meant to be at the London School of Economics. And like I told you, I looked into all of this data. I decided to stay here. My talk was meant to be 9 days after my flight would have gone back to the UK. And I was emailing the organizers, and everybody was still figuring it all out. And then a few days after that, it was like, okay, the LSE, the London School of Economics, is closing until September. We need to postpone this, right? So again, it was a little bit like watching the movie unfold, because after my deep dive, I was like, this is coming. They're going to have to close. They're going to have to postpone, to cancel. Same with my meetings, all of that.
And I'm seeing a pattern here with your sort of foresight. Of course, we were talking about the health tech field where you were interested in a couple of years ago, and now with the COVID thing, you seem to sort of preemptively predicted, not predicted, but you must have had a feeling about it, which actually brings me to my next topic, in which I did a short case study on South Korea and their sort of response to COVID-19, and how they managed to flatten the curve, for now, hopefully. And they had taken up a number of measures which are very interesting, such as telemedicine initiatives through apps, and remote working, remote education, remote working also within the public sector. What do you think about these? I don't know if you've ever heard of these contact tracing apps that are sort of been used as widespread in Asia, almost as normal in Singapore, in South Korea, and they're, sort of taking people around the world are sort of learning more and more about them. What are your sort of thoughts on that?
So as in monitoring people close by, the contact, what is it that you do?
And alerting you as a user, as an app user, that route may have been taken by an unfortunately infected patient not too long ago.
Yeah, so I think that, this is also a good example of how on the public sector you can lead with foresight too, right? And so it takes a certain kind of coordination and a certain push as well. And this might get us down a deep rabbit hole, which is incentives for politicians in the West. So do not get me started on this. But the bottom line is, when you've got an incentive systems for politicians, that effectively means, I cannot really do the hard right thing for everybody, because I need to manage constantly my image and expectations and what I do. And if I do this, then the other party might be happy about it, and all of that. Exactly. So in a situation like this, it just gets uncovered. And what you find in there is ridiculous, right? And so being able to implement measures like what you mentioned, right, about tracking. If you look at Singapore, for instance, there is a real leader in there who shows up, says the things that need to be said, even when they're not pretty, but in a way that inspires confidence, and all citizens as a result, rather than having, Trump saying, oh yeah, there's nothing coming here, and we got it all under control, and in April, the temperature is gonna make it disappear, and all of this kind of stuff. You've got leaders who take responsibility, right? And actually say that and take care of their people for real. So huge difference.
Absolutely. And like you rightfully said, I think that Asia not only has had a prior experience. I mean, I was living in Hong Kong during SARS, when SARS hit in 2002. And of course, I think that I have heard some good news about Hong Kong and how they've sort of managed to control the situation quite a bit. And of course, as a public consciousness as a whole, of course, when humans sort of see a pattern repeating, they take more action, or they're more open to action at least. And of course, you're seeing this divide between certain other countries and certain more quicker response countries, or smarter response countries, let's say. And I think that I noticed that you may inadvertently be a fan of remote working. Do you think that this pandemic has sort of accelerated that trend? How do you feel about that?
For sure. Look, I feel great. It's good that the rest of the world is catching up with this as well. It's no news here. And I think it's got endless benefits. It needs to be done right. And so you see companies that have, spent a few weeks kind of figuring out the ropes. But I think that it's really good for everybody to be getting to a certain level playing field with that. Okay, we can do video calls. And yes, because at the end of the day, what does it mean, except for the obvious arguments of less emissions because people travel less, they can work from home, but also I think the flexibility of lifestyle that it can give to people, empowering people to actually make choices with a wider spectrum of opportunities, right? Like I'm here, I'm working from here, and it was difficult to explain until recently, because sometimes, like, if someone is less familiar with remote working, you're like, yeah, but how do you do it? And for me, it's like the other way around. Like, why is that difficult to understand? But now everybody gets it, right? Because everybody's working from home, whether they like it or not. But overall, the catch up is really good for many reasons, I think.
Yes, and it's also very interesting to hear worldwide global leaders sort of promote it now in a very positive manner. I just watched an interview with Mr. Mohammed Al-Abar. He's a developer of a very notable real estate investment firm here called Emaar. They've done the Burj Khalifa, which is the tallest building in the world, the tallest mall, the biggest mall, etc. And he's also launched an e-commerce platform. And he said openly in the interview that he actually previously had frowned upon remote working because he thought that it would decrease productivity within his staff. But he's very, very pleasantly surprised as to how productive they've been during this pandemic. And he's not the only sort of notable figure that's come out and said that. And I think that that's a great thing, because of course it can help a lot of individuals who are in very uncomfortable positions commuting to and fro, for hours, and of course other people who just sort of prefer it too. So coming to my next point, which I'm very, very keen to hear your response on as well, is of course the blockchain involvement, perhaps. If you see any sort of propelling of blockchain or wider usage of blockchain as a result of the pandemic, either in the health space or the tech space or the education space, do you see that happening at all?
Definitely. So we can talk about Bitcoin and then blockchain, because kind of like separate topics. So what I'm seeing with Bitcoin is that more and more institutional players, not just retail clients, are starting to understand that this is not a diversified kind of like asset that's about it. So treating it like a fancy derivative, what does a derivative do when the market moves? It moves even more, right? It's highly sensitive. So instead of treating it that way, they're starting to understand that actually Bitcoin is a real asset and is a store of value. It just really is. It's designed like that. It runs itself. Nobody can interfere with it. So this is starting to really like come into the mainstream, both institutionally and for people as they look for options when we have to face hyperinflation coming up, when we have to face so many things in the world today and in the economy that we haven't had to face for a long time, and think about what to do around it. And so I'm seeing that happening in the Bitcoin space, which is very exciting, because it's been a problem of education more than ever. And then in the blockchain space as well, I think that areas like corporate blockchain usage have started to yield results of like, decreasing costs by delivering efficiencies that were impossible before. And all those case studies, which by the way are quite silent because it's not the mainstream press type of thing. It's not the kind of thing that people talk about out there, also because the companies implementing it are not particularly interested unless it's more for marketing purposes. But in the cases where it's not about that and it's generally about the bottom line, there starts to be like a few really good case studies like to show for it. And so adoption is coming more and more.
The concept of gold when it comes to sort of economic depressions or downfalls or a fall in the stock market, just let's get into gold, is sort of the age old sort of idea, but of course Bitcoin has been coined per se digital gold almost, something that corporations and people start to bank on when it comes to bad times. So what do you think that has sort of been a little bit into play this pandemic as well? Because I'm actually seeing a very interesting statistic into how Grayscale Investments Q1 2020 earnings report showed capital inflows totaling $503 million into cryptocurrency investment products, and then 390 million of that went into Bitcoin Trust, which is incredibly interesting.
Yes, yes, definitely. So gold is interlinked because, again, store of value. And as people start wondering, okay, we can do gold. What are the options for gold? What else except for gold? Oil, sure, oil has been moving like crazy, as we've seen. The options are limited. And so I think that the interlink with gold happens on a few levels. One is just explaining it and understanding that this behaves like digital gold. And I think there are quite a few people who wonder, about the custody of gold, obviously, right? And so, if you really want physical custody, that's not easy to do. With crypto, much easier, right? You get actually physical custody, but it doesn't weigh a ton, right? So you can actually manage that. And so there are many benefits about it. Even if you have it in, obviously, third party custody, there are a lot of different options around it that people start to understand. So yeah, the comparison is there and it's clear.
Yes, and I think it's crystal clear, absolutely. Alessandra, I think one of the points that we can both agree on is, in fact, that everyone can agree on is well-being is very important, not just as a thought leader, not just as a person, but just generally during this pandemic. And I understand that you have been, active as a person forever. So can you tell us a little bit about how your sort of well-being upkeep has been during this time?
Yeah, of course. I love it. I was actually about to post one of my trainings in calisthenics on Instagram. So calisthenics is when you exercise with your body. So that can be things like push-ups, squats, jumps. It also goes and encompasses like things like running, like normal kind of like ways to work out, but especially when you work with your body weight. So what I do actually right now is I do yoga in the mornings. And I love yoga. It's been a few years. I've always been very sporty. So I grew up as a pro swimmer. I qualified as a windsurf teacher, a snowboard teacher. I'm massively into kite surfing now. So, I've always been active, and I've mostly been active with like explosive, intense activities. And when I got into yoga, initially I thought, it's like, maybe not for me. And then I loved it so much because it was actually like, it's great balance and it's like, it's so good for you in plenty of ways. But then I went almost so much for it that with the limited time, I did less of the active stuff like calisthenics, and now I've been getting back into it and really loving it. So yeah, my routine is basically yoga in the morning and then lunch break, some sweating with that.
I think that's fabulous because I personally always found, intense activities like HIIT training and horse riding and to be like a huge rush. And then when it came to sort of more stretching and balance and things like yoga, it was the complete opposing force almost for your body. But it is what athletes or athletic people need to recover, or even just to gain focus. And there are many advantages to it. And so what is your draw to the water, and what do you feel that it does to you? Why do you feel attracted to it?
There's something magic about elements that are not necessarily the ones that we live and breathe in. There's something magic about all elements, but I think that with water specifically, I do remember how as a little child, like very tiny baby, it's almost like I have this flashback memory when you almost didn't create memories, right? Where I remember just floating in the water and loving it so much. And then later being told, yeah, like you loved it so much. And then I started going to swimming classes, love that too. But yeah, there is something about the water, and when you're in the water, that is so special. And actually, there are scientific explanations that have caught up with this, because often science just catches up later with something that we cannot describe or we think is magic, right? And so when you actually go fully in the water, when your face is fully in the water, your vagus nerve, which is a very important nerve in the body that kind of regulates also your relax, like your, like a lot of functions, a lot of good things for you. it relaxes. It relaxes because like evolutionary, like if you're under the water, you need to spare oxygen, right? And so it has this amazing effect on you like that, which I've discovered more recently, by the way. But yeah, there's something about the water that I just find so special.
I think that's amazing. I personally do as well, and also it's fascinating to hear the science facts, because there is always sort of a reason why we feel good when we're, like you said, fully immersed, and it's again equally important to be kind of on the ball with your mental and physical health during this time. And it's really, really nice to hear how you sort of keep that up in yourself. So thank you so much for your time. It's been a fabulous conversation. We always have fabulous conversations, and really looking forward to having another one with you really soon.
Amazing. Same here. Love this catch up. Thank you.